If you're a woman over 50 who wakes up exhausted from saying yes to everyone else and no to your own peace, this video will change everything. Here's the counterintuitive truth that will shock you. Your constant availability isn't serving anyone, it's stealing from everyone, starting with yourself. What I'm about to share sounds harsh but will set you free. Saying yes when you should say no isn't love. It's disobedience. It's disobedience to the God who designed you with limits, who modeled boundaries through Jesus, and who calls you to steward your energy wisely. This video is for every woman over 50 who's tired of being tired, who's ready to protect her peace without guilt, and who wants to learn what the Bible actually says about saying no. I'm Haas Name, and for the next hour, we're diving deep into why saying yes is stealing your peace after 50. Here's a truth that might sting a little. Your inability to say no is slowly killing your peace, your purpose, and your relationship with God. I've watched countless women over 50 become prisoners in their own lives, not because of external circumstances, but because they've turned their mouth into a yes machine that operates without consulting their heart, their energy, or their Creator. Picture Linda, 54, who volunteers for everything at church, babysits grandchildren every weekend, hosts every family gathering, and still feels guilty when she can't help her neighbor move furniture. By the time she collapses into bed each night, she hasn't had 5 minutes alone with God. Luke 5:16 tells us that Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. Even the Son of God knew that saying yes to everyone meant saying no to his Father. Here's what's happening in your yes-addicted life. Every yes you give away is actually a piece of your soul you're surrendering. Think of your daily energy like a bank account. You wake up with a certain amount deposited by God, and every yes is a withdrawal. The problem is, most women over 50 are writing checks their soul can't cash. They're overdrafting their peace account and wondering why they feel spiritually bankrupt. Right now, I want you to think about the last 5 times someone asked you to do something. How many times did you say yes immediately, without even checking with God first? Here's your first assignment for the next week. Before you say yes to anything, take a breath and say, "Let me check my calendar and get back to you." That pause is sacred. That pause saves souls. But here's what most women don't realize. Jesus himself modeled something that will shock you about the power of saying no. And when you see how the Savior of the world handled requests, everything changes. Here's something your Sunday school teacher probably didn't emphasize. Jesus said no, a lot. 2 sick people, 2 crowds who needed him, to his own family, 2 urgent requests that seemed like obvious opportunities to do good. If this makes you uncomfortable, good, it means you're about to learn something that could revolutionize your understanding of biblical boundaries. In Mark 1:37-38, the disciples found Jesus praying alone after a night of healing and said, "Everyone is looking for you." This was urgent. People were suffering. The crowds had needs. But Jesus responded, "Let us go somewhere else to the nearby villages so I can preach there also. That is why I have come." He said no to immediate needs to stay true to his ultimate purpose. Jesus understood something we've forgotten. Saying yes to everyone means saying no to your calling. Every time Jesus withdrew, every time he left crowds behind, every time he didn't heal someone who needed healing, he was demonstrating that boundaries aren't selfish, they're spiritual. He knew his Father's agenda was more important than people's expectations. Your yes should be reserved for what God has specifically assigned to you, not what guilt or pressure, or even genuine need tries to assign to you. I want you to find one example this week where you can follow Jesus' model. Maybe it's leaving a gathering while people are still talking because you need rest. Maybe it's not responding to a non-emergency text immediately. Maybe it's saying, "I'm not the right person for this, but I'll pray about who might be." Practice saying no to good things so you can say yes to God things. But I know what you're thinking, but I feel so guilty when I say no. Sister, that guilt has a name, and it's been sabotaging your peace for years. Let's call it out. The guilt you feel when you set a boundary isn't conviction from the Holy Spirit, it's conditioning from years of believing that your worth comes from your willingness to sacrifice yourself for everyone else's comfort. That guilty feeling in your stomach when you say no. That's not God. That's the sound of people-pleasing patterns breaking, and it's supposed to feel uncomfortable. Remember Martha? She was doing good works, serving Jesus and his disciples, preparing food, being hospitable. But when her sister Mary chose to sit and listen instead of help, Martha got indignant. She expected Jesus to validate her people-pleasing, but instead he said, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, only one. Mary has chosen what is better." Sometimes what feels like serving is actually just anxiety dressed up as spirituality. Guilt is often misplaced responsibility. You feel guilty for not fixing problems you didn't create, not meeting needs you weren't assigned to meet, not being available for every emergency that isn't actually your emergency. Here's the truth. God didn't design you to be the savior of everyone's problems. He already has a savior, and you're not him. Your guilt often means you're taking on responsibilities that belong to other people or to God himself. The next time you feel guilty for setting a boundary, ask yourself these 3 questions. Did God specifically assign this responsibility to me? Am I saying no because I'm being selfish, or because I'm being wise? What am I saying yes to when I say no to this? Write down your answers. You'll be surprised how often your guilt dissolves when you realize you're being obedient, not selfish. And speaking of obedience, there's a skill every woman over 50 must master: learning to distinguish between God's voice and people's demands. The difference will change everything. Not every request that comes your way is from God, even when it comes from good people asking you to do good things. Some requests are human convenience, masquerading as divine assignment. Learning to discern the difference between sacred callings and secular demands is the difference between a life of purpose and a life of exhaustion. When the devil tempted Jesus in the wilderness, he didn't tempt him with obviously evil things. He tempted him with good things: feeding hungry people, proving his divinity, gaining political power to do good in the world. Jesus recognized that even good suggestions can be satanic distractions. Proverbs 16:9 says, "In their hearts humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps." Just because someone needs something doesn't mean God wants you to provide it. Sacred requests usually come with peace, even when they're challenging. They align with the gifts God has given you, the season you're in, and the direction He's leading your life. Secular requests, even ones that come from church, people often come with pressure, guilt, or the feeling that someone has to do it. So it might as well be me. God's assignments come with God's grace to complete them. Human assignments often leave you feeling drained and resentful. Before you say yes to any request this week, pray this simple prayer: God, is this from you? Does this fit with what you're doing in my life right now? Do I have peace about this decision? Then wait for an answer. Don't rush to fill the silence. God's voice often comes as a deep knowing, a sense of rightness or wrongness that transcends logic. Trust what He shows you. But here's where it gets really complicated for women over 50. We're often caught in the middle, caring for everyone from aging parents to struggling adult children. The caregiver's dilemma is real. If this first insight spoke to you, subscribe now so you don't miss the journey ahead. We're just getting started on this boundary transformation. Here's the trap that catches every caring woman over 50. You've spent decades training yourself to notice when others need help, and now you can't stop. Your radar for other people's problems is so finely tuned that you pick up distress signals from 3 counties away. But here's what nobody tells you. Having a compassionate heart doesn't mean you're required to be everyone's solution. Even Jesus had to navigate the caregiver's dilemma. In Mark 3:31-35, his own mother and brothers came looking for him while he was teaching, probably worried about his health and demanding schedule. But instead of immediately dropping everything for family, he looked at those around him and said, "Whoever does God's will is my brother and sister and mother." He loved his family, but he didn't let their concerns dictate his calling. The caregiver's dilemma isn't just about time management, it's about identity management. You've learned to find your worth in being needed, your purpose in being useful. your peace in having everyone else settled and happy. But God never intended for your emotional well-being to depend on everyone else's emotional state. Think of it like being a lifeguard. A good lifeguard knows the difference between someone who's drowning and someone who just doesn't want to swim back to shore on their own. This week, I want you to identify one person in your life who has learned to depend on you for things they could handle themselves. Maybe it's an adult child who calls you to solve every minor crisis, or a friend who uses you as her personal therapist. Choose one small way to step back and let them handle their own situation. Start with something minor. Don't rescue, don't fix, don't even offer advice unless they specifically ask. And here's what's fascinating about stepping back from the caregiver role. It forces you to confront how you've been spending your most precious resource, your energy. Let's talk about that. Your energy is the most valuable currency you have, and you've been giving it away for free to people who wouldn't think twice about spending it. Every yes you give, every favor you do, every crisis you solve costs you something precious that you can never get back. At 50 plus, you don't have the luxury of treating your energy like it's unlimited. When the woman with the issue of blood touched Jesus' garment, he immediately knew that power had gone out from him. Mark 5:30. Even Jesus felt the energy cost of healing and helping others. He understood that giving has a price, and he was intentional about when and how he spent his spiritual and physical resources. If the Son of God had to manage his energy carefully, how much more should we? Think of your daily energy like a bank account. You wake up with a certain deposit, and every interaction, every task, every emotional investment is a withdrawal. Some people are energy drains, they take more than they give. Others are energy gains, they leave you feeling refreshed and renewed. The problem is, most women over 50 have never learned to budget their energy. They spend it like money they don't have and wonder why they feel bankrupt by noon. For 1 week, I want you to track your energy like you'd track expenses. Notice which activities, people, and commitments energize you and which ones drain you. Write it down. Don't judge it, just observe it. At the end of the week, ask yourself, am I investing my energy in ways that align with what God has called me to do, or am I just spending it on whatever seems urgent? But here's the beautiful thing about learning to steward your energy. It gives you the space to use one of the most powerful tools in your boundary toolkit. I call it the power of pause. Let me pray about it. 4 words that can save your sanity, protect your peace, and preserve your purpose. But most women over 50 have been conditioned to believe that needing time to think means they're being difficult, indecisive, or selfish. Here's the truth. Immediate yes is often disobedient yes. God rarely calls you to make important decisions under pressure. When the Israelites stood at the edge of the promised land, they sent spies to scout the territory before making their move. Even when God had already promised them the land, they took time to assess the situation. Proverbs 27:14 reminds us that plans fail for lack of counsel. But with many advisors they succeed. Sometimes the wisest advisor you can consult is time itself. The pause is powerful because it breaks the urgency addiction that drives most boundary violations. When someone pressures you for an immediate answer, they're usually trying to bypass your wisdom and appeal to your emotions. Think of the pause like a circuit breaker in your home. When too much pressure hits the system, it automatically shuts down to prevent damage. Your "let me pray about it" response protects you from making decisions you'll regret. Starting today, eliminate the phrase "yes, of course" from your vocabulary. Replace it with "that sounds important. Let me check my calendar and pray about it, and I'll get back to you by specific time." Then actually pray about it. Ask God if this opportunity aligns with His plans for you. You'll be amazed how many requests dissolve when you give them time to marinate in prayer. And speaking of protecting yourself from pressure, there's one group of people who will test your boundaries more than any other: your own family. Let's talk about love without enabling. The people who love you most can become the biggest threats to your peace, not because they're malicious, but because they've learned that your love means you'll always say yes. Your family knows exactly which buttons to push to make you feel guilty, responsible, and obligated. But here's what they haven't learned yet. Boundaries aren't rejection, they're protection. When Jesus' family thought he was out of his mind and came to take him away from his ministry, he didn't abandon his calling to make them comfortable. In Matthew 10:37, he even said, "Anyone who loves their father or mother more than me is not worthy of me." This sounds harsh until you realize he's talking about not letting family dysfunction override God's direction for your life. Family boundaries are the hardest to set because they challenge decades of established patterns. Your family has learned to see you as endlessly available, infinitely patient, and always willing to sacrifice your needs for theirs. But enabling isn't love, it's actually a form of harm. When you constantly rescue family members from the consequences of their choices, you're preventing them from growing up and learning responsibility. Think of it like holding a butterfly's wings. Your help actually hurts their ability to fly. Identify one family pattern where you've been enabling instead of helping. Maybe you always host holidays even though it stresses you out. Maybe you loan money that never gets paid back. Maybe you solve problems that aren't yours to solve. This week, have one honest conversation about changing that pattern. Use loving but firm language. I love you, and because I love you, I'm going to start letting you handle this yourself. But family isn't the only place where boundary violations happen. If you're still working, your professional life might be where your peace goes to die. We're building something powerful here, sister. These truths about boundaries are going to change everything about how you live your faith. If you're still working after 50, you've probably noticed something. Younger colleagues expect you to have infinite availability because you're experienced, and older ones expect you to pick up slack because you're reliable. Meanwhile, you're caught in the middle, saying yes to overtime, extra projects, and responsibilities that should belong to someone else's job description. Your workplace boundaries aren't just about time, they're about respect. When the Israelites were enslaved in Egypt, they were expected to make bricks without straw, to do impossible work with insufficient resources. God didn't tell them to work harder or be more grateful for their jobs. He told Moses to lead them out. Sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do in a workplace situation is recognize when enough is enough. Ecclesiastes 3 reminds us there's a time for every matter under heaven, including a time to say no at work. Work-life boundaries after 50 require a different strategy than they did in your 30s. You're no longer trying to prove yourself or climb ladders. You're trying to finish strong while preserving your health and relationships. The truth is, most workplaces will take as much as you're willing to give and then ask for more. Think of it like a gas tank. Just because you can drive on empty doesn't mean you should. Professional boundaries protect your energy for what matters most in this season of life. This week, identify one work habit that's stealing your peace. Maybe you check emails after hours, stay late because you feel guilty leaving, or take on projects that aren't in your job description. Choose one boundary to implement. Set specific email hours. Leave the office at your scheduled time, or have a conversation about realistic expectations. Remember, you're modeling healthy boundaries for younger colleagues who are watching how you navigate this season. But here's where work boundaries get especially tricky for Christian women. When your workplace is the church, ministry burnout is real, and it's devastating. Church people can be the worst boundary violators because they wrap their requests in spiritual language that makes you feel ungodly for saying no. God is calling you to serve. We're counting on your faithfulness. This is kingdom work. But here's what they don't tell you. Jesus withdrew from ministry regularly. And if the Son of God needed breaks from serving people, you definitely do too. In Luke 4:42-43, crowds came looking for Jesus early in the morning, wanting him to stay and continue ministering in their town. These weren't casual requests. These were people who genuinely needed healing, teaching, and hope. But Jesus said, "I must proclaim the good news of the kingdom of God to the other towns also, because that is why I was sent." He had boundaries around his ministry calling that he wouldn't violate, even for genuine need. Ministry burnout happens when you start believing that your availability determines God's ability to work. You begin to think that if you don't say yes to every church request, People will suffer and God's work won't get done. This is spiritual pride disguised as humility. God's plans don't depend on your exhaustion. He can accomplish His purposes through other people, other methods, other timing. Your job is to be faithful to what He's specifically called you to do, not to everything that needs doing. Look at your current church commitments honestly. Which ones energize you and align with your gifts, and which ones drain you or feel like obligation? This week, have a conversation with your pastor or ministry leader about stepping back from one commitment that no longer fits your calling or season. Use this language: I want to serve where I'm most effective. I think my gifts would be better used elsewhere. And speaking of energy drains, there's a boundary issue that's probably robbing your peace every single day, and you might not even realize it's happening. Your phone is a boundary violation waiting in your pocket. Every notification is someone else's agenda interrupting your peace. Every text, email, and social media alert is essentially someone saying, "Stop whatever you're doing and pay attention to me right now." And if you're like most women over 50, you've been trained to respond immediately, as if every digital request is an emergency. When Jesus wanted to pray, He didn't just find a quiet place, He found a lonely place where people couldn't reach Him. Mark 1:35 says He went to a solitary place. In our world, solitude requires intentionally disconnecting from the digital demands that follow us everywhere. Psalm 46:10 tells us to be still and know that I am God. But stillness is impossible when you're constantly available to everyone else's noise. Technology boundaries aren't about being rude, they're about being intentional. Every time you let your phone interrupt a conversation, a prayer time, or a moment of rest, you're teaching people that their convenience is more important than your peace. Think of your digital availability like visiting hours at a hospital. Just because someone wants to reach you doesn't mean you have to be reachable. Your presence is a gift, not a right. This week, establish one clear technology boundary. Maybe it's turning off notifications after 8 p.m., putting your phone in another room during meals, or designating 1 hour each morning as phone-free time. Start small, but start somewhere. Notice how anxious you feel when you first implement this boundary. That anxiety is evidence of how badly you needed it. But here's what's interesting about digital boundaries. They're often easier to set than social boundaries. The people in your real life have learned exactly how to make you feel guilty for protecting your time. Your social calendar has become a prison, and you're the one holding the keys. Every invitation accepted out of guilt, every event attended because you should, every gathering you host because it's expected. These aren't expressions of love, they're expressions of fear. Fear that people won't like you if you're not constantly available. Fear that you'll miss out on something important. Fear that saying no makes you a bad person. When Martha complained that Mary wasn't helping with dinner preparations, she was essentially saying, social obligations are more important than spiritual priorities. But Jesus defended Mary's choice to sit and listen instead of serve and stress. Luke 10:42 records His words, "Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." Sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is skip the social event and choose solitude instead. Social obligations become boundary violations when you start attending out of duty rather than joy. Here's the test. When you think about an upcoming social event, do you feel energized or drained? Do you look forward to it or dread it? Quality relationships don't require constant maintenance through social events. Real friends understand when you need to say no, and acquaintances who get offended by your boundaries probably weren't investing in genuine friendship anyway. Look at your social commitments for the next month. Identify one event or obligation that you're dreading or attending only out of guilt. Practice declining graciously. "Thank you for thinking of me, but I won't be able to make it." Don't over-explain or apologize excessively. No is a complete sentence, and you don't owe anyone a detailed justification for protecting your peace. Now, I know what some of you are thinking, but what if I physically can't do what people are asking? That brings us to one of the most important boundaries of all. We're halfway through. If these truths are helping you, subscribe and stay connected. The transformation is just beginning. Your body after 50 is sending you messages that you've been trained to ignore. The back pain when you lift too much, the exhaustion after overscheduling, the headaches from stress, these aren't character flaws, they're divine design. God built limitations into your physical frame as protection. But somewhere along the way, you learned to treat your body's wisdom as weakness to overcome rather than guidance to follow. When Elijah ran from Jezebel and collapsed under a tree, asking God to let him die, God didn't rebuke him for being weak. Instead, he sent an angel with food and told him to rest. 1 Kings 19:5-7 shows us that sometimes the most spiritual response to exhaustion is sleep, not more service. Your physical limitations aren't obstacles to God's plan, they're part of it. Physical boundaries after 50 require a fundamental shift in how you view your body. You're not betraying people by admitting you can't do what you used to do. You're not being lazy by needing more rest than you used to need. You're not being dramatic by acknowledging that certain activities cause you pain. Your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit, and temples require maintenance, not just utilization. Think of physical boundaries like speed limits. They're not there to restrict your freedom. They're there to keep you safe. This week, identify one physical boundary you need to set. Maybe it's not lifting heavy things for other people, not standing for long periods at events, or not pushing through pain to meet someone else's expectations. Practice saying, "I'm not able to do that anymore, but here's what I can do instead." Offer alternatives when possible, but don't apologize for honoring your body's limits. And while we're talking about limitations, there's another area where women over 50 feel enormous pressure to say yes: financial requests. Let's address the money conversation. Money conversations reveal the deepest truth about your boundaries, whether you believe your resources belong to you or to everyone who asks for them. Financial boundaries aren't about being selfish with money, they're about being wise with the resources God has entrusted to your stewardship. Every dollar you give away in guilt or pressure is a dollar that can't be used for God's actual plan for your finances. When Judas criticized Mary for wasting expensive perfume on Jesus instead of selling it for the poor, he sounded spiritual and practical. But Jesus defended her choice to give lavishly in the right moment to the right person for the right reason. John 12:7-8 records Jesus saying, "Leave her alone. You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me." Even generosity requires discernment about timing, recipients, and amounts. Financial boundaries protect your ability to be generous when God calls you to be generous. When you loan money you can't afford to lose, give to every sob story that crosses your path, or feel obligated to fund every family member's poor decisions, you're actually limiting your capacity for true biblical giving. Think of your finances like a river with banks. The banks don't stop the flow, they direct it where it's supposed to go. Without financial boundaries, your generosity becomes a flood that helps no one. Create one specific financial boundary this week. Maybe it's deciding you won't loan money to family members anymore, or setting a specific amount you're willing to give to charitable requests without discussing it with your spouse, or establishing a rule that you'll pray for 24 hours before making any financial decision over a certain amount. Write down your boundary and stick to it, even when people pressure you to make exceptions. But here's what's fascinating about financial boundaries. They often reveal emotional patterns that go much deeper than money. Let's talk about protecting your heart and mind. You've become the emotional dumping ground for everyone in your life, and you don't even realize it's happening. People call you when they're upset, visit when they need to vent, and expect you to carry their emotional burdens as if their peace depends on your willingness to absorb their chaos. But here's the truth: taking on other people's emotions isn't love, it's enabling, and it's making both of you weaker. When Job's friends came to comfort him in his suffering, they started well. They sat with him in silence for 7 days. But then they began trying to fix, explain, and analyze his pain, and their help became harmful. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to take responsibility for someone else's emotional state. Galatians 6:2 tells us to carry each other's burdens. But verse 5 says each one should carry their own load. There's a difference between helping and enabling. Emotional boundaries mean you can care about someone without carrying their emotions. You can empathize without absorbing. You can listen without fixing. Think of emotional boundaries like a rain jacket. It keeps you dry while allowing you to walk alongside someone who's getting soaked. When you consistently absorb other people's emotional storms, you lose your ability to be a steady presence in their lives because you become just as unstable as they are. Identify one person in your life who regularly uses you as their emotional dumping ground. This week, practice setting a gentle but firm boundary. You might say, "I can see you're really struggling with this. Have you considered talking to a counselor about it?" Or, "I care about you, but I'm not able to process this with you right now." It will feel uncomfortable at first, but remember you're helping them learn to manage their own emotions. And here's what's beautiful about learning to set emotional boundaries. It prepares you for something even more challenging, your boundaries as your life seasons change. The boundaries that worked for you at 50 might be suffocating you at 60. The commitments that energized you in one season might be draining you in another. But most women over 50 feel guilty about changing their boundaries, as if consistency means never adjusting to new realities. Here's the truth. Seasonal boundary adjustments aren't betrayal, they're wisdom. King David had different boundaries as a shepherd boy than he did as a warrior, and different boundaries as a warrior than he did as a king. Each season of his life required different priorities, different relationships, and different ways of stewarding his time and energy. Ecclesiastes 3:1 reminds us that there's a time for every matter under heaven, including a time to say yes and a time to say no to the same things. Seasonal boundaries require you to regularly evaluate what's working and what isn't in your current life stage. The volunteer position that fulfilled you when your kids were young might feel burdensome now that you're caring for aging parents. The social commitments that energized you in early retirement might exhaust you as health issues emerge. Think of seasonal boundaries like updating your wardrobe. What fit perfectly last year might not fit your current reality. Take an honest inventory of your current commitments and boundaries. Ask yourself, what worked for me 5 years ago that doesn't work now? What boundaries do I need to adjust for this current season of my life? What would I need to say no to in order to say yes to what God is calling me to right now? Write down one boundary adjustment you need to make and take one small step toward implementing it this week. But here's where boundary setting gets really practical. How do you actually say no in a way that's kind but firm? Let's learn some scripts. Look how far we've come together. You're learning to protect your peace in ways that honor both your limitations and your calling. You know you need to say no, but the words get stuck in your throat every time someone asks for something. You end up saying yes when you mean no, or saying no but apologizing so much that people think you don't really mean it. Here's what you need. Actual scripts for actual situations that let you be kind without being weak, firm without being harsh. When the Pharisees tried to trap Jesus with difficult questions, he didn't stumble over his words or apologize for his responses. He was clear, direct, and unapologetic about his boundaries. In Matthew 22:21, when asked about paying taxes, he simply said, "Give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." No lengthy explanations, no guilt, no people-pleasing, just truth delivered with confidence. Effective boundary communication is about clarity, not cruelty. You don't need to justify your no with a detailed explanation of your schedule, your finances, or your feelings. Most people accept clear boundaries better than they accept wishy-washy maybes. Think of boundary scripts like having the right tool for the job. When you know exactly what to say, you're more likely to say it with confidence and less likely to cave under pressure. Memorize these 3 boundary scripts this week. For time requests, "I'm not available for that, but thank you for thinking of me." For financial requests, "That's not in my budget right now." For emotional dumping, "I can see you're struggling. Have you talked to anyone professional about this?" Practice saying them out loud until they feel natural. The key is to say them kindly but without apology. But here's what happens when you start using these scripts. Some people won't like your new boundaries. They'll push back, test your resolve, and try to make you feel guilty. Let's talk about handling boundary violations. When you start setting boundaries, some people will act like you've personally attacked them. They'll guilt trip you, manipulate you, or get angry with you for protecting your peace. Here's what they're really upset about. You've stopped being predictably available for their convenience. Their reaction to your boundaries tells you everything you need to know about their respect for you. When Jesus cleansed the temple, the religious leaders were furious not because he was wrong, but because he was disrupting a system that benefited them. Sometimes when you set boundaries, people get angry because they lose the advantage they had when you had no limits. Jesus didn't apologize for upsetting people who were taking advantage of others. In John 2:16, he said, "Stop turning my Father's house into a market." Sometimes righteous boundaries require righteous firmness. Boundary violations usually follow a predictable pattern. First, they'll test your resolve with small pushes. Then they'll escalate to guilt trips or emotional manipulation. Finally, they might resort to anger or threats to withdraw their relationship. Here's the key. People who truly care about you will respect your boundaries, even if they don't like them. Those who violate your boundaries repeatedly are showing you that they value their convenience more than your well-being. When someone violates a boundary you've set, use this 3-step response. First, restate the boundary clearly. As I mentioned, I'm not available for that. Second, acknowledge their reaction without taking responsibility for it. I can see you're disappointed. Third, redirect or end the conversation. Let's talk about something else, or I need to go now. Don't defend, explain, or apologize for protecting yourself. And here's what's crucial to remember during boundary violations. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to feel guilty. You're going to want to give up. That's when you need self-compassion more than ever. You're going to mess up your boundaries. You're going to say yes when you meant to say no. Cave under pressure when you're meant to stand firm. And feel guilty for protecting yourself when you should feel proud. Here's what you do with that guilt. Nothing. Guilt over healthy boundaries is not conviction from God's conditioning from years of people-pleasing, and it will pass if you don't feed it. When Peter cut off the soldier's ear, defending Jesus, he was trying to do the right thing but went about it the wrong way. Jesus didn't shame him for his mistake, he simply corrected the action and healed the damage. In Luke 22:51, Jesus just said, "No more of this," and fixed what needed fixing. Sometimes learning healthy boundaries means making mistakes and then making corrections, not achieving perfection from the start. Self-compassion in boundary setting means treating yourself like you'd treat a good friend who's learning a new skill. You wouldn't shame a friend for stumbling while learning to walk, and you shouldn't shame yourself for stumbling while learning to say no. Every boundary you attempt, even the failed ones, is building muscle memory for the next opportunity. Think of boundary setting like learning a new language. You're going to mispronounce words and make grammatical errors before you become fluent. The next time you mess up a boundary, try this self-compassion script. I'm learning something new, and learning requires practice. That didn't go the way I wanted, but I'm proud of myself for trying. What can I learn from this experience that will help me next time? Write down one lesson from your boundary mistakes this week, and celebrate the fact that you're brave enough to keep trying. And speaking of support while you're learning, you're going to need people in your life who understand and respect your new boundaries. Let's talk about building that support system. The people who've benefited from your lack of boundaries won't celebrate your new boundaries. They'll resist them, test them, and try to convince you that protecting yourself is selfish. That's why you need a support system of people who understand that boundaries aren't walls, they're gates with you as the gatekeeper, deciding what comes in and what stays out. When Nehemiah was rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem, his enemies mocked him, threatened him, and tried to distract him from his work. But he had supporters who helped him continue the construction while staying alert to opposition. Nehemiah Jumpat Lewat 17 Menit says, "From that day on, half of my men did the work, while the other half were equipped with spears, shields, bows, and armor." Sometimes protecting your boundaries requires having people who will stand guard with you. Building boundary support means finding people who model healthy limits in their own lives and celebrate them in yours. These might be friends who don't guilt trip you for saying no, family members who respect your availability limits, or mentors who've learned to protect their own peace. You need people who understand that your boundaries make you a better friend, family member, and servant of God, not a worse one. Look for people who say things like "good for you" for saying no to that instead of "but they really need your help." Identify 2 people in your life who seem to have healthy boundaries themselves. This week, have a conversation with one of them about your boundary setting journey. Ask for their support and accountability. You might say, "I'm learning to say no to things that don't align with what God's calling me to do. Can you help me stay strong when I'm tempted to people please?" Having even one person who celebrates your boundaries makes all the difference. And here's the beautiful thing about building support for your boundaries. It positions you to teach the next generation how to protect their peace from the very beginning. Let's talk about legacy boundaries. The boundaries you set today aren't just about your peace, they're about the example you're setting for your daughters, granddaughters, and every younger woman who's watching how you navigate this season of life. When you say no without guilt, you're teaching them that their worth isn't determined by their availability. When you protect your time and energy, you're showing them what healthy stewardship looks like. In Titus 2:3-4, Paul instructs older women to teach what is good, and so train the young women. This includes teaching them how to set healthy limits, make wise choices, and protect their peace. One of the most powerful lessons you can pass on is that saying no to good things allows you to say yes to God things. Your boundary legacy is part of your spiritual legacy. Legacy boundaries mean thinking beyond your immediate peace to the long-term impact of your choices. When your adult daughter sees you setting limits with extended family, she learns that she can do the same. When your granddaughter watches you say no to overwhelming commitments, she learns that her energy is valuable. When younger women in your church observe you protecting your time for prayer and rest, they learn that spiritual disciplines require practical boundaries. Think about the younger women in your life, daughters, granddaughters, nieces, mentees, or friends. What boundary lesson do you most want them to learn from watching you? This week, have an intentional conversation with one younger woman about boundaries. Share what you've learned about saying no, protecting your energy, and putting God's calling above people's expectations. Your wisdom could save her years of people-pleasing pain. And now, beautiful sister, we come to the moment of decision. Everything we've talked about leads to this: your personal commitment to start protecting your peace. Are you ready? The finale is coming. Make sure you subscribe so you never miss what's next. We're about to create your personalized boundary plan. Everything we've talked about for the past hour comes down to this moment. Will you choose peace over people-pleasing? Will you trust God's design for your life over other people's demands on your life? Will you believe that saying no to some things allows you to say yes to the right things? Your boundary-setting journey starts with a prayer and a plan. When Jesus taught his disciples to pray, he included the words "deliver us from evil" in what we call the Lord's Prayer. Sometimes the evil we need deliverance from isn't external temptation, it's the internal compulsion to say yes to everything and everyone. Matthew 6:13 reminds us that we need God's help to resist what seems good but isn't God's best for us. Your boundary-setting plan needs divine wisdom and supernatural strength. Your boundary-setting prayer plan has 3 components: daily prayer for wisdom to discern God's yes from people's pressure, weekly review of your commitments to ensure they align with your calling, and monthly evaluation of your energy and peace levels to identify needed adjustments. This isn't about becoming hard-hearted or selfish, it's about becoming more like Jesus, who only did what he saw the Father doing and only went where the Father was leading. Starting today, pray this boundary prayer every morning. God, help me to see this day through your eyes. Show me what you want me to say yes to, and give me courage to say no to everything else. Protect my peace so I can serve from a full heart, rather than an empty obligation. Let my availability reflect your priorities, not people's preferences. Then throughout the day, pause before every commitment, and ask, is this from you? Sister, your story of boundary setting starts now. Your peace-filled life begins with your next no. Your purpose-driven days start when you stop saying yes to everything that seems urgent and start saying yes only to what's truly important. The question is, what will you choose? Sister, look at the journey we've taken together. We've exposed the yes epidemic that's been stealing your peace. We've seen how Jesus modeled healthy boundaries and learned to escape the guilt trap that keeps us people-pleasing. We've discovered how to discern sacred requests from secular demands and navigate the caregiver's dilemma without losing ourselves. We've learned to treat our energy as precious currency and harness the power of pause. We've built family boundaries that love without enabling and work-life limits that protect our purpose. We've addressed ministry burnout and technology boundaries. We've chosen quality over quantity in social obligations and honored our physical limitations. We've set financial boundaries and emotional boundaries. We've learned to adjust boundaries seasonally and communicate them clearly. We've handled boundary violations with grace and practiced self-compassion when we stumble. We've built support systems and created legacy boundaries that teach the next generation. 22 transformations, 22 ways to protect your peace and reclaim your purpose. But it all comes down to your prayer plan and your daily choices. Here's what I want you to remember. Your yes should be reserved for what God has specifically assigned to you, not what guilt, pressure, or even genuine need tries to assign to you. When you say no to the wrong things, you're saying yes to the right things. Your boundaries aren't barriers to love, they're the foundation for sustainable love. So here's my challenge to you. What boundary will you set this week to protect the peace God wants you to have? Will you finally say no to that commitment that's draining your soul? Will you set limits with that family member who treats you like their personal problem solver? Will you stop checking emails after hours or answering calls during your prayer time? Your boundary-setting journey is a spiritual discipline that honors God and serves others better than your constant availability ever could. When you protect your peace, you protect your ability to love from a full heart rather than an empty obligation. If this message convicted and encouraged you, here's what I want you to do. First, subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. Every week, I'm here to help women over 50 live their faith with wisdom, boundaries, and purpose. Second, comment below and tell me, what's the first boundary you're going to set after watching this video? I read every comment, and I'm praying for your courage to choose peace over people-pleasing. Third, share this video with another woman who needs to hear that her worth isn't determined by her availability. Someone in your life is drowning in yes when she needs permission to say no. Remember, sister, your boundaries aren't selfish, they're your peace isn't optional, it's ordained, and your yes matters most when it's preceded by wise and prayerful no's. Until next time, keep your soul flowing in the direction God is leading, not where people are pulling.